In the high-octane world of Formula One, Sergio Perez finds himself teetering on the edge of a precipice. The Mexican driver, who has been a mainstay in the sport for several years, is facing the very real possibility of losing his seat from 2025 onwards. However, the more immediate concern is that his team, Red Bull, are contemplating a mid-season switch. This comes as the competition in both the Constructors and Drivers' Championships has intensified to such an extent that the Austrian outfit can no longer afford to rely on just one driver. The latest statements from team principal Christian Horner, advisor Helmut Marko, and driver Daniel Ricciardo, coupled with Perez's own harsh self-criticism of his performance, suggest that we could see a change in the driver lineup sooner rather than later. The question on everyone's lips is whether Ricciardo is the right choice to replace Perez. Perez's recent performances have been a major letdown, particularly when considering the points he has scored in the last 6 races. From the Miami Grand Prix onwards, during the grueling triple header, Perez was only able to amass a meager 11 points. To put this into perspective, Nico Hülkenberg, driving for the less competitive Haas team, managed to score more points in his last 2 races than Perez did in his last 6. Adding to Perez's troubles is the fact that Logan Sargent, driving for Williams, has managed to outqualify him 7 times this season out of 12 races. This is well beyond the 50% mark and highlights the handicap Red Bull is facing in both championships. There is reportedly a clause in Perez's contract that stipulates he cannot be more than 6 places below his teammate, Max Verstappen, in the Drivers' Championship, nor can he have a deficit of more than 100 points compared to Verstappen before the summer break. Currently, Perez is not only in P6, but the gap to both Mercedes drivers is negligible. The tide could turn as quickly as the next race in Hungary, especially considering Mercedes is set to bring aggressive upgrades, while Red Bull is struggling to find even tiny bits of performance. Horner himself has admitted that the team has reached the ceiling with the car. This raises the question of why Red Bull would renew the contract of a driver who is underperforming so heavily, putting not only his team but also his teammate in a very difficult situation. With Verstappen battling 2 drivers from McLaren, Ferrari, or Mercedes ahead in the foreseeable future, the other teams could count on tactics, tire management, and pitting one driver earlier to keep Verstappen behind for as long as possible, allowing the other driver to catch up faster. This is significantly important in the Constructors' Championship, too. Had it not been for McLaren's botched strategy at Silverstone, Russell's DNF, and the mixed conditions, Verstappen himself said that he would have likely finished Yod P5 or P6 as he had no pace on the medium tire. Perez's race in Silverstone was massively influenced by the team's poor tactics of putting him on the first set of intermediate tires way too early in the race. It's safe to say that this is probably the first mistake that the team has made from the pit wall in terms of Perez's poor performance. When asked why Perez's contract was renewed during such a poor period, when everyone was expecting a switch between Perez and Yuki Tsunoda or Ricciardo, Horner responded that it was a brutally hard question. He added that the point at which you sign a driver, the contents of any agreement, are not going to be disclosed to the public. It made absolute sense to sign Checo at that point in time, but this is a business in which there are pressures to deliver. What we've constantly seen with Perez is this resilience to be able to bounce back, and we're hoping to see that very soon. There is no doubt that Perez has been quite successful in this process of bouncing back in the past couple of years, but this is when Red Bull had the most dominant car, and it was nowhere near close with the rest of the rivals. If this spell continues like this, it would inevitably mean that Perez could lose not only the place to both Mercedes drivers, but to Oscar Piastri as well, and ultimately end up at P9 in the Drivers' Championship. For further reference, Pierre Gasly was P6 in the Drivers' Championship when the team decided to replace him with Alexander Albon in a mid-season swap, as he was lapped by Verstappen in Hungary. Keep in mind that the Austrian team didn't have the most dominant car at that time, so Perez is doing a lot worse in a lot better machinery to be considered a legitimate Red Bull driver at this point in his career. Be that as it may, the situation is loud and clear. The money that Perez brings to the table, thanks to the Telmex sponsorship and the merchandise he sells in Latin America, is something that the Austrian squad is not willing to give up on just yet. This time, however, a lot is at stake, and with both championships still far from over, especially the Constructors one, where we have a proper four-team battle. If Ferrari could figure out the bad nature of their latest upgrades, then Red Bull should be a lot more careful with who they put in the second seat next to Verstappen. This is why talks about Ricciardo replacing Perez in the middle of the season have been sparked yet again. The Racing Bulls shareholders have reportedly shared their wishes and intentions when it comes to this team. It should be one driven by young drivers, not by veterans. Ricciardo's experience and input in the car are greatly appreciated, but this is not the nature of the team, as confirmed by Marko. While many have already seen Ricciardo out of the sport due to his own poor performance compared to Tsunoda at the beginning of the season, the Aussie could be in for a great promotion in his career. While Red Bull won't want a second competitive driver next to Verstappen, due to the point of challenging him for race wins and potentially even championships in the future, Ricciardo would be the best option. As of now, one would find it extremely hard to imagine that there is a driver on the grid who could perform worse than Perez in the RB20. Ricciardo himself spoke about the scenario of him driving in a Red Bull, and when talking about it, the Aussie didn't want to spark up any further comments, but still kept the situation quite tense by saying that nothing is certain in this sport. He added, "I would never make any predictions in this sport. I feel like every year that this sport goes on, the more it gets. I know it kind of goes in the trend of the sport is getting bigger. It's becoming more Hollywood, so to speak, in terms of the profile the sport has, and also the narrative that runs with the sport now. It's certainly more Hollywood in terms of it. It is so unpredictable. So do I have any proof that I'll be anywhere else? I do not, and yeah, it's that crazy things happen. But I'm certainly not in a place to say that, or think that, or even predict it. So I just try to keep doing my thing." Now, the situation couldn't be clearer for Perez. You either deliver points in the next two races in Hungary and Spa, or you see yourself being replaced during the summer break, as further nudged by Helmut Marko. The veteran Austrian said that the media and the entire F1 world would know a bit more about the situation between Perez and Ricciardo during the summer break. The recent news that Liam Lawson is scheduled to test the RB20 during Silverstone's tire test, the very same test that catapulted Daniel Ricciardo into his seat at AlphaTauri last year, is raising eyebrows across the paddock. Christian Horner, Red Bull's team principal, has downplayed the significance of this, insisting that it's part of a regular schedule and should not be spun into a whirlwind of speculation. However, it's hard to ignore the parallels with Ricciardo's situation. When the Australian driver clocked similar lap times to Max Verstappen in the same car at Silverstone, it was clear that he was being lined up as a replacement for the underperforming Nick de Vries. Now Lawson, the young Kiwi driver, is eager to demonstrate that he has what it takes to compete at the highest level of motorsport, particularly in a team like Racing Bulls. This comes at a time when Racing Bulls are under significant pressure, facing the very real threat of losing a spot in the Constructors' Championship to Haas. The American team has scored 20 points in the last two races and is now just 4 points behind the Italian squad in the battle for P6. On the other hand, if Lawson is not offered a seat in 2025, despite Helmut Marko's insistence that the team has plans for him, the 22-year-old has threatened to look elsewhere. This could potentially deal a significant blow to Red Bull's hopes of retaining the promising junior driver, especially at a time when even Verstappen's future with the team is far from certain. With all this in mind, do you think Red Bull should replace Perez with Ricciardo and give the Racing Bulls seat to Lawson? More importantly, where do you think this would place them in both the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships? We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of Formula One and want to stay updated with the latest news, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Keep the pedal to the metal, and we'll see you at the next race.